Dobro. History. Archive.
So today, we're going to talk about what might just be the single deadliest event in all of modern history. And no, it wasn't a war. It was an invisible enemy, one that killed way more people in just 1 year than World War I did in 4. This is the story of the 1918 pandemic, which you've probably heard called the Spanish flu. But first, let me ask you a question. Just think for a second. What do you think has killed the most people in human history? You know, your mind probably jumps to wars, maybe famine. And yeah, those are absolutely devastating. But the real answer is something much, much smaller and way deadlier. The answer? A virus. Back in 1918, a single strain of influenza killed an estimated 50 million people across the globe. And get this, some historians think the real number could be as high as 100 million. It's a number so huge, it's honestly hard to even wrap your head around. Let's try to put that in perspective. The war to end all wars, World War I, had just torn the world apart for 4 brutal years, killing around 40 million people. This flu killed more than that in just a single year. In the US alone, the war took about 116,000 soldiers. The flu came home and killed 675,000 Americans. Just staggering. Okay, so that brings us to our first big mystery. Why on earth do we call it the Spanish flu? Because, and I mean this, it absolutely did not start in Spain. That name is basically the pandemic's first and most successful piece of fake news. The whole reason for the name comes down to wartime censorship. See, the major countries fighting in World War I, we're talking the US, Britain, France, Germany, they all had a stranglehold on the press. Reporting a massive flu outbreak was seen as terrible for morale. In America, you could literally be thrown in jail for it under the Sedition Act. But Spain was neutral. Their press was totally free. So when the flu slammed Madrid in May of 1918 and even infected their king, they reported on it. And because they were the only ones talking about it, the rest of the world just assumed it started there. But this was so much more than just a misleading name. By keeping the public completely in the dark, these governments gave the virus a massive head start. It got to spread silently and totally unchecked for months. So if it didn't start in Spain, where did it come from? Well, all the most compelling evidence we have today points not to Europe, but right to the American heartland. It looks like it all began in January of 1918. A doctor in rural Haskell County, Kansas, a guy named Loring Minor, noticed a flu of, in his words, unusual severity. He actually sent a warning to the U.S. Public Health Service, but nobody listened. A couple months later, it hit Camp Funston, a huge army base about 300 miles away. One cook reported sick. Within 2 weeks, over 1,000 soldiers were in the hospital. And from there, tens of thousands of American boys boarded these jam-packed troop ships to Europe, taking the virus with them. The war machine itself became the engine of the pandemic. Now, that first wave in the spring of 1918, it was actually pretty mild, all things considered. But the virus was traveling. It was mutating. It was learning. And in the fall of that same year, it came back. And it wasn't the same virus at all. This time, it was a monster. The second wave had this absolutely terrifying signature symptom called heliotrope cyanosis. What happened was the virus would just destroy the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid. The body, starved for oxygen, would literally start to turn a dark bluish purple, almost black. The nurses came up with this brutal way to do triage. They just look at a patient's feet. If their feet were black, they knew there was nothing they could do. There's this letter from a doctor at Camp Davins in Massachusetts, Roy Grist. He described patients suffocating in just a matter of hours. He wrote, "It is horrible. One can stand it to see 1, 2, or 20 men die, but to see these poor devils dropping like flies sort of gets on your nerves." You can just feel the sheer horror in his words. But here's the thing that baffled scientists for 100 years. Who it was killing. See, normally, the flu is most dangerous for the very young and the very old. If you chart it, it looks like the letter U. But in 1918, the graph looked like a W. There was this third massive spike right in the middle for healthy adults between 20 and 40 years old. Why was being in the prime of your life a potential death sentence? For a century, the leading theory was this idea of a cytokine storm. The thinking was that a young, strong immune system would overreact so violently to the virus that it would end up destroying the body's own lungs. Made sense, right? Well, a brand new study from 2023 has pretty much debunked that. Scientists analyzed the skeletons of victims and found that the young people who died weren't the strongest. Actually, they were the ones who showed signs of previous stress and poor nutrition. The virus just did what diseases always do. It found the vulnerable. So the virus wasn't just attacking bodies. It was attacking the very fabric of society. And the way different cities responded became this incredible and tragic lesson in what to do and what not to do. Just look at the story of two cities. First, Philadelphia. Even though doctors were screaming warnings, the city went ahead with a massive Liberty Loan Parade. 200,000 people crammed into the streets. Within 1 week, 4,500 of them were dead. Now let's look at St. Louis. The health commissioner there acted fast. He immediately shut the whole city down. Schools, theaters, public gatherings, all of it. And the result? St. Louis had an infection rate that was 1/8 of Philadelphia's. The lesson just couldn't be clearer. Taking early, decisive action saves lives. And if you think arguing about public health mandates is something new, think again. In January 1919, San Francisco tried to enforce a mask ordinance. What happened? Citizens formed the Anti-Mask League. Seriously, 4,500 people showed up to a rally that was led by doctors and even a city's supervisor. And their main argument? That the mandate was an unconstitutional infringement of their civil liberties. It's just chilling how much history can echo.
So how did this global nightmare finally come to an end? And maybe even stranger, why did an event that killed 50 million people just disappear from our collective memory?
Well, the pandemic had one last tragic act. When the war finally ended on Armistice Day, the world just exploded in celebration. People poured into the streets. They were singing, cheering, kissing total strangers. It became what historians now call the single greatest superspreader event in human history, a final, cruel wave of death that was delivered by the arrival of peace. After that final wave, it just seemed to vanish. But here's the thing. There was no medical victory. We didn't beat it. No vaccine was developed in time. No cure was found. The pandemic stopped for one simple, brutal reason. It ran out of fuel. It had infected an estimated 1/3 of the entire planet. It just burned through the human race until it ran out of new people to infect, and the survivors were now immune.
So why did we forget? How could we forget something so massive? Well, for one, the end of the war just completely overshadowed it. People wanted to celebrate peace, not mourn an ugly death from some disease. And, unlike a war, a pandemic doesn't have a clear story with heroes and villains. It's just messy and sad. So the world basically made a collective choice to have historical amnesia. It was just easier to forget.
But the story of 1918 is really a playbook. It's a warning. It shows us that censorship can be deadly, that acting fast saves lives, and that our society is just as vulnerable as our bodies. And it really leaves us with one crucial, nagging question. When the next one comes, and there will be a next one, will we have a better answer?